Recording in progress.
And welcome back to The Broken Brain, everybody. It's your host, Dwight. And this morning, when I looked at my calendar and saw what we were talking about today, I couldn't help but think of Jim Carrey when he played The Mask a long time ago. I don't know the average age of my listeners, but I think that one's made it into the culture where he said, smokin'. Okay. You all know my brain is a big word association machine, but I thought of that because today we're getting into smoking, amongst some other things as well. As people know, we talk about addiction a lot on the show, and today we're going to talk about the practice of smoking and how we can sort of address and deal with that. My guest today is Dr. Eli Camp. She is a naturopathic doctor and a diplomat of the practice of homeopathy. She's also an author of the book Smoke Rings, and I'm just excited to talk this. The smoking particular focus is not something we've really done, or at least not for a long time. The show's been on a long time, so maybe I missed one. Everybody go listen to every episode. Tell me if I'm wrong. But anyway, Dr. Camp, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dwight. I'm really excited to be here.
Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how did you get into working in medicine and your particular focuses and such?
Absolutely. So I am part Cherokee, and my grandmother and my great-grandmother both were very into herbs and holistic living and things like that. And so when I went to my undergraduate training at University of Oklahoma, I got involved in doing scorpion research and all kinds of really cool stuff. And yet, when at the end of the day, the calling to help other people build optimal health really pulled me into medicine. And I didn't want to be the kind of doctor that just diagnosed and wrote prescription drugs for people. I wanted to do something a little bit different, which is why I went into the field of naturopathic medicine and went to medical school in Arizona. It's a 4-year program, did a residency, did all the normal doctor stuff, but really focused on how to restore health in a human, because when health is restored within the human body, there is no need for the body to put off symptoms of illness because it's not ill anymore. And so I've spent over 20 years in practice and worked with all kinds of folks and have figured out that really what people want to know is, what can I do today? How can I get through today and do my best and not poison myself any more than I have to? And so that sort of motivated me to write some of the books that I've written.
Wonderful. I know that as we were talking, even just setting this up, I noticed, you're very, very, I would say, patient focused. And that would be something that, and traditionally, one of the things people will complain about in medicine is if I'm talking to someone and they either aren't listening to me, not that, that happens, or they have a kind of the cookie cutter approach of just kind of like, oh, we'll do this. And it's like, well, either I'm struggling doing that, or I don't know if I'm ready to do that, or maybe I don't want to do that, or whatever it is that they're telling me. And then the conversation sometimes is over. And then what do? I'm just left. I just go, well, I'm just not going to do it, I guess. And in your book, you don't focus on the assumption of a abstinence-based goal or a smoking cessation goal in people. You don't assume anything, right?
Correct. So I've learned, for me individually as a practitioner, it's meeting people where they're at. And a lot of patients that have come to me over the years find their way to me because of what you just said. I'm telling my story and nobody's hearing me, and they want to put me in a box and treat me like everyone else, but I'm not like everyone else. And so as a healer, as a physician, the number one thing that people can do to immediately change their health if they smoke anything is to stop smoking. I will always say that that's the number one approach to be healthier and be better, but it's not the only thing. And not everybody is ready to stop smoking today. Many people try for years and years and years to quit anything that they've become addicted to, right? it's a challenging journey. So while we're on that journey, we just sort of languish and we have to suffer, poor health or ill health simply because we're not reaching that goal. And I don't believe that best serves each individual person.
Mhm. Yeah, I talk a lot about the harm reduction approach, and it's very, very similar. It's an approach to addiction. And by the way, I wanted to add too, I think when we talk about smoking, we often don't use the language of addiction or the research about addiction. We talk about it as just gross or, well, you should knock it off, kind of a thing, which is very old fashioned. And many people nowadays would never say some of the things to someone with many, not all, would never say something like this to someone they know with a drinking problem or a drug problem. It would be like, well, I'm a little more educated on that. So I think that is a big gap in the way we address certain issues. Food is one, and smoking, oddly enough, is one of them too.
Yes.
And in harm reduction, people often have one of two misperceptions. Harm reduction is simply what you're saying. I'm working with a person who's going to come in. They have their goals, and they're like, here's what I want to do, and here's what I'm able to do, willing to do, whatever it is. We dig into individualization of goals. Many people think that it's either permission of saying like, well, hey, you can still, if you want to. And many people also think that it's starting where they're at and then maybe, for lack of a better term, tricking someone or moving them with, I secretly or whatever have this goal still of you have to do this solution. I'm going to move you closer and closer to abstinence only. But it's not that. That is not what we're doing. And I don't know, do you see that kind of misconception or even accusations that get thrown out
I do.
when you approach it that way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, people are very, very conscious of and aware of being manipulated into doing something that they've decided they're not ready to do or they don't want to do or they can't do, right? We know people, all humans tell ourselves a story of what we can do, what we can't do, how we're going to do it. And yeah, it's not permission. It is really saying, okay, where are you at? What are you going through? And how, the way I approach this with smoking is, how do I help you be in your healthiest state every day? Because you can end every day healthier or right than you started it. You can make decisions during the day that, I don't want to say completely negate the effect that the smoking has on the body, but you sure can make decisions that lessen the effect that smoking has on the body every single day. And you take it one day at a time. Now, I will say this, sometimes as people's body become healthier, right, as they approach a healthier state, sometimes I found that they say, I don't want to smoke 15 cigarettes today. I'm just going to have 4 or 5. But it's not because we've tried to convince them of that or they're trying to convince themselves. They just don't feel like it as much as they did the day before or the week before. So it is a side effect of getting healthier that you sometimes make different choices.
I just interviewed recently the co-founder and developer of the Prime for Life program, which is a alcohol education program, often for court-ordered introductory. People with problems have gotten out of hand, often with alcohol. They have a lot now that focuses on cannabis, and there's just basically, it applies to addiction. One of the very interesting things is the definition of no risk is, of course, not ingesting an intoxicant. The definition of low risk, though, is kind of tight, where it's like with drinking, it's a very small amount, even daily, but it's a small amount, and that is considered low risk. Anything beyond just a buzz or a couple of drinks is considered potential high risk and everything. So when we have those windows, I think educating people about that's very useful. But then once again, what we don't want to trigger is, so I call this the Dr. Laura syndrome. I remember when Dr. Laura was on the air, something happened to where she wasn't anymore. I don't want to get into that. Anyway, but I remember I think most of us in the counseling profession were annoyed by that. Anyway, but one of the things that happened was I noticed people would call and she'd say, well, here's my list of unrealistic expectations of how people live their lives. Do you do all that? And they'd say, well, of course I do. And it's like, well, they're all lying. Maybe not all. But I think of this where it's like, if my pressure is to tell my medical professional lies so they'll keep talking to me and help me instead of rejecting me, then there's something's off. Something's goofy.
Oh, yeah. I agree with you. Well, we want our approval of our healthcare provider. I'm a physician, and I even want my own doctor to look at me in a positive light and acknowledge that I'm doing the things that I need to be doing for me that they've suggested. It's just built into us. I think it starts really young, depending on the kind of parents you have, right? We set up this whole, you do this, and if you do it this way, I'll be proud of you and I'll approve of you. And that carries into our adulthood, right?
Yeah. I remember being at a conference a long time ago. It was a domestic violence focused conference, and they talked about what they called advocacy beyond leaving. In other words, if the most ideal is to leave a toxic relationship, you can't just kick out everybody who says, I'm not leaving today, right? And so,
right.
So what are some of the management either techniques or ways that you approach having a healthy as possible use, or just maybe how do people make even the decision of what they want to do? How do you encourage them without controlling them?
So the book starts out by explaining the sort of the paradigm of medicine that I practice from, which is I believe the body has the ability to heal itself, and that a body that's given what it needs and has toxins or things that prevent that healing from happening removed, and you sort of stimulate that the animating force within us that makes us different from a rock, right? We all have biochemical and physical properties, the rocks and people do, but there's something more in a person that animates us, right? We think of it as a vital force or just that the animus is an old word from the time of Hippocrates, something that makes us go. And you have to support that. So give the body what it needs, remove what's poisoning it, and stimulate the built-in, the innate healing ability of each human being. And this is the perspective of medicine that I practice from. And so the book starts out by explaining that. And then I go through the foundations that must be in place for a body to heal itself, to be considered optimally healthy. And that doesn't mean that you have the health of a marathon track star. It means that for you, in your situation, in your everyday life, what does your optimal healthy look like? Because when you're there, you don't really have symptoms of illness to speak of. And so I explain this early in the book and tell folks that if you're going to do something that is damaging to your body, whether that's eat bad food, not exercise, spend too much time on a screen, smoke tobacco, smoke cannabis, drink, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're going to engage in something every day that toxifies your body, then you need to counterbalance that by detoxifying your body, right? So building health. And I go through the cornerstones of naturopathic medicine, which is nutrition, sleep, mind, body, supplements, physical medicine, like all the things that help create health. And then the rest of the book really dives into the different parts of the body so that people can understand. So I start with the respiratory system, believe it or not. And I say, this is what happens when you take in smoke, whether it's smoking inhalation from a house fire or it's smoking a cigarette, it doesn't matter. When you bring in smoke to the body, this is what happens. And it's very black and white. It's completely non-judgmental because I don't feel people can make decisions if they feel judged, not good, healthy decisions. And so I talk about what happens in the body, and then I say, all right, so that's what happens. Now, what can you do each and every day to balance that out, to negate the effects, to lessen the effects, not really negate, but to lessen the effects on the body? And that has to do with things like vitamin C. So I give very practical. When you get done with that chapter, you know exactly what you need to do to support your respiratory system. When you smoke, you burn up vitamin C. So have you included extra vitamin C in your life in the form of food or a supplement or something like that? And I go through herbs and I go through different supplements and I go through the dreaded smoker's cough. I bring in some homeopathy for that because it's a specialty of mine. Um, the way you move, the way you sleep, things like that. And so I go through each of the systems of the body, starting with the respiratory. I do the endocrine system, the nervous system. There's all kinds. There's like 20 different sections of the body that we focus on, and we talk about specifically what happens and how can you support that.
How much of your approach here is reactive to the harmful effects that smoking is causing, and how much would you say is proactive, like this is good to do anyway, and will also help? I mean, I'm not sure as I say that, maybe that's a bad question. I don't know if there's a delineation there, or how would you answer that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Dwight. So the first part of the book is all about preventative and proactive, and it doesn't matter if you smoke or not. The first part of the book is foundational. It's cornerstones. Any human on the planet would benefit from reading the first few chapters. When we start talking about the systems, now we're talking about responding to damage that person is doing and what's happening in their body. And so it's more reactive, right? We respond to the damage they're doing because they are damaging. And that's really what we have to think about when we have a smoker or anyone doing something damaging to the body is how do we mitigate that damage? How do you, right? We were talking about this just before you turned the recording on about how everybody who smokes or does anything that's not good for their body, they know that they're doing that every minute that they're doing that. And that creates cognitive dissonance in people, right? I know this isn't good for me. I can't help myself. I'm going to do it anyway. I don't know what I would do if I didn't do this. Then they get done and they don't feel good about doing it. And they're like, that's it. I'm going to be done. Like, this is the dialogue that happens in people's head when they're addicted to something. And smoking is no different.
How big of a relationship do people have with shame then? Because that's inherent to what you're discussing. And
yes,
and it's funny because I've never met anyone, I don't think, who's said like, oh yeah, I think this is good for me, or who hasn't, that sometimes if I've known them well enough to be around them a long time, if they smoke. And growing up growing up largely in the 80s, boy, it's a lot more if you watch TV from that era or something. You're like, I forgot how often people did. So many people did, but everybody was like, yeah, this is gross. This is bad for me. Yeah, I should stop. But anyway, right. there's a shame feature in there that sometimes I think would get in the way of being healthy or as healthy as possible. Yeah.
Now there's a shame factor. Do you remember the ads and the TV commercials where the doctors were hanging out with a cigarette telling you how good it was for you, how it opened up your respiratory system? And it was just like when they introduced X-ray. Oh, it's the best thing. It's therapeutic. Come see what's inside your body. Well, they did that until they put two and two together and they said, oh, you know what? Smoking isn't so good for us. And now we know it is something we shouldn't do it if we want to be our healthiest. Mm-hmm. And in the last, I would say 20 years, in some places this isn't true, but in the United States it is a shameful activity to engage in and people hide it. And society has structured things so that you have to go hide in a little corner of the park or of a facility, or you're not supposed to be seen on campus, or like they've made it so that it's a shameful activity. So yes, that adds on top of the fact that they know it's not good for their bodies in a helpful way. It's also a mental, emotional. Yeah.
And if I think badly about myself, I think one of the biggest risks is that we don't even try to do anything because it's like it kicks in all or nothing thinking,
right.
To where we're saying like, oh, I should try to be healthier. Oh, I didn't. So, and then we actually will do whatever it is more Oftentimes, I'm going to try to cut
Sure.
down.
Why not?
I didn't really cut down, or I'm going to try to stop, and I did it at all this week, and so I'm just not going to monitor it anymore. And then it's more
Yep.
and more and more, right? So
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Which is a bummer because then anytime you can smoke one less or five less or 10 less, right? Or eat one less McDonald's hamburger, or I hope they're not a sponsor of yours, or like
Not anymore. No, I'm just kidding.
well, anytime you can do less of something that's harmful to you,
Camel
you
cigarettes.
come
There.
out.
Sorry. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you come out with a net plus. Because you've poisoned a little bit less, and then you're doing all of this great stuff to support your body. The net effect is that you're ahead at the end of that day. And it makes the next day not so, I don't know, depressing and daunting and hopeless. People reach that hopeless stage. Folks on a diet do this a lot too, right? They blow a day and that's it. That's it. They throw their hands up and they're like, I'm not even going to try tomorrow or next week. Well, I think that what I've tried to do in this book, and I've had a lot of great feedback, is that people say I can really take it one day at a time. I can focus on one step at a time, one thing at a time, and I can go to bed at night feeling not as bad about myself as I used to feel. And that makes it all worthwhile as a healer to hear that.
Do you find that it is difficult to get people into this mindset? I'm curious about, obviously, the group we're talking about is the patients you work with, but what about their loved ones?
So, yeah, I sell a lot of books to loved ones of smokers, believe it or not, maybe more to the loved ones of smokers than I do to the smokers themselves, because the smokers are pretty sure that book is all about how they need to quit smoking. And they don't want to really hear anything other than that, where the loved ones will take a minute, they'll look through it, they'll say, oh, well, this doesn't really have a stop smoking plan in it. And I'm like, no, because that's an individual choice. And I don't want to make that choice for anyone. And they'll read through it and they'll say, I really need to get this for so-and-so because this could potentially help them. Now, once a smoker starts reading the book, my emails flooded every day with emails about, thank you so much for not making this another book about quitting smoking. It's a very sad statistic, actually. Only 3% of smokers are actually successful in quitting long-term. I mean, I almost hate to say it out loud, but it's been a statistic that has been run over and over and over again. They can quit for a few months, but they go back to it, and that's not a successful smoking cessation. And so they're overjoyed to have something in their hands that help them. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting when we measure it that way. Do you feel like the measurements are, well, I guess looking at it as an all or nothing, it's either that would be an abstinence-based study, I would think.
Right. It is.
Who is. Yeah. Yeah. That's, that's also tied in with some of the problems that I do see with people, and a lot of programs with abstinence-based only, like restrictive abstinence-based goals in addiction with drug and alcohol use, have similar results.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And I guess, that gets into if there are a large amount of people who have a, whether you want to call it a relapse or continued use in one kind or another, and if we don't look into that at all, then that's a whole lot of people who just feel like failures all the time, who are at risk, I would say. And I find this in therapy too, and I'll use drinking as an example, as I often do, and say if it's a big, huge relapse and I've lost all my healthy practices and progress and I'm back at square one, that mentality oftentimes negates a lot. It negates a lot of things I've learned, because inherently we learn a lot by confronting compulsion and addiction. And, I still know all that. And I always use the phrase, use math as our friend. If it's like, boy, I used to just have these bad, high risk kind of consequences from my drinking, or I used to do it so much more often. I used to, have, it would lead to bad things. And now it's less often. But if I believe there's no difference, then I don't embrace, I'll slip right back into those bad consequences versus like if I say, wow, boy, in the last, even if someone's goal is, I don't want to do it ever again. And in the last year, I did it 3 times. Well, that's remarkably different, right?
Right.
Or whatever, and worth celebrating instead of being like, I still do it at all, so I suck. Yeah.
Yes. I often start my visits with my patients and I ask them, do you have any atta girls or atta boys to tell me about? What happened in the last week or 2 weeks or month, however long it has been since I've seen them, that you're really proud of? Before they tell me all the things they didn't do, I encourage them to tell me, what are you really proud of yourself for doing? And that's because I've noticed this pattern, and it's exactly what you're talking about, where what we think of ourselves, our self-talk, really has a whole lot to do with how we think other people see us. If we see ourselves a certain way, surely everyone else can see that too. And in that field of psychoneuroimmunology, the way you think creates chemical streams in the body, and it releases all types of hormones and neurotransmitters that have a direct effect on our mood and our motivation and our belief in ourselves. We have to have faith in ourselves, or it's very hard to get through the day without being afraid of what if. You don't have faith in yourself, you don't know that you can make it through what if. And so I think that it cannot be black and white. It can't be 0 or 1. It can't be yes or no. It has to be, what's the best you can do in this moment, and do that best that you can do in this moment, and be proud of yourself for doing your best in that moment. If you can do better tomorrow, great. If tomorrow you can't do as well, so be it. There's always another opportunity. And that's what I try and communicate.
Now, what's about on the other side of shame? I realize when we're talking about this, it's not permissive. But so if we try to avoid shaming on the one end, the slippery slope into shame, then the old triple S, as people call it. On the other hand, there might be what we might call either denial or permissiveness of ourselves to say, I'm not going to try at all, and maybe even whatever. What would you say, how do we balance that, on the other hand, to actually avoid, what might be the misconception of building, increasing permissiveness in ourselves to say, I'm going to do this and not manage my health?
Right. So that was my number one concern in writing the book. It's one thing sitting with a patient face to face where I can look at them and say, I'm not telling you it's okay to smoke. What I'm telling you is you have to do something to offset the effects of that. And I've had several colleagues reach out to me and say, it almost feels like you're telling them, go ahead and smoke because you can fix anything with a few supplements and and eat the right food.
If I take some vitamin C, I'm good.
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And that's not it at all. It doesn't completely wipe it out. It does not undo all the damage. In fact, it's not enough for you to walk around and say, oh, I'm doing a good thing for myself by smoking, and then I'm doing all these things, right? It's not. But it is some small thing that people can do. I try not to think of it as being permissive. In every chapter, I think in almost every chapter I say, now we know that stopping smoking is the best thing for you, but it's not the only thing. Here's some other things that you can do to support your body while you may or may not be on that path. So I think I said it, and I probably said it too many times. People probably read those lines in each chapter. I'm like, okay, lady, you said that already in the first chapter. But that was a way for me to counterbalance my responsibility as a healer, knowing that quitting smoking is the best thing. But please don't do nothing. If you're going to smoke, do something to support your body. That's really,
I think,
how
there are times where over communication, if that's a term, is, I think, important, because as someone who's providing expertise, I think there are times where the focus is clarity in the form of I want to be understood in what I'm saying. And then on the other hand, there's the kind of clarity that is like, I want to be careful not to be misunderstood in this way that commonly this topic might be. And so, yeah, I would say
Right.
it's good to have that in there because, oh boy, otherwise, if I'm already inclined, like most people, to focus on what I want to hear, and it's like, hey, this book says I can smoke. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, but it says a lot more frequently that I could see why you would do that.
Yes. Yes.
So acceptance, and this is where the difficulty also, maybe a subset or it's related. It's in the neighborhood of between shame and permission. It, to me, is the acceptance that I am doing something. It's bad for me, and I can do other things. Or if I'm not gonna stop, or whatever, I can accept that I'm not trying to do no risk, no damage through this. I am doing some damage, and I am, there's an acceptance piece, and that a healthy form of acceptance in between these two. How do you see people resolve that, where they can accept I'm doing this, and I'm trying to be healthy, and without sliding into those other areas?
Yeah, it's hard for people to accept that, and especially accept it out loud. It's something they say in their head. They know in their head, but maybe if I don't talk about it, it's not as real as if I do talk about it. And so I work, in person, I work with people on that. And the way I've written the book is to encourage people to accept the fact that they are doing something and to acknowledge that it is causing damage in the body, but to take that extra step and say, okay, I accept that this is happening. I acknowledge that I am responsible for the damage happening to my body, but I also am acknowledging that I am responsible for doing something good for myself. That's how I see it fall. They first have to be able to admit and accept responsibility before they can take the next step and want to do something that's then in turn good for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, with these things that you focus on, I know that you operate a nonprofit as well and work with a nonprofit. I love to, and as everybody knows on this show, we really try to highlight, especially local nonprofits in certain areas. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what you do with that?
Great. Well, thanks for that opportunity. So it's Long Shadows Ranch, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work with kids and teenagers and young adults to teach them about creating and living a sustainable life, growing food for themselves, hunting, fishing, being able to care for themselves, whether they're within or without of the system, right? And we're Cherokee. And so we do this through the lens of Cherokee Lifeways, which were highly sustainable, very good for the planet, taking time to pay attention to many generations to come. And these kids come and they work here, they study with us, they learn, they volunteer their time, and we provide a framework, a structure for them to understand life through a different lens. It's a good, clean lifestyle. We sold our house in Norman, Oklahoma 4 years ago and completely changed our lives around. I went to being a part-time doctor, and now I'm a full-time rancher farmer with ducks and chickens and horses and oh my goodness, bees, all kinds of stuff. We have 17 acres. People can pitch a tent. They can stay here. We take donations of all kinds, cash, time, tools, supplies. And it's really, we've become a heart here in the community. We feed people, we give people sanctuary and hope.
How has that affect? Obviously, there's a lot of practical effects of your day to day, but how has that changed you to go through that change of lifestyle?
Well, I'm in better shape than I have been in my entire life. I can pick up a hay bale. I can sling 10 gallons of milk, which has to weigh at least 50 pounds. I am outside breathing fresh, clean air and getting sunbathed every day. It has changed. I have clearer thinking. What's really interesting is I think I have some of my sensory system that's kind of waking up now that I've been out of the city. Like I can smell the rain. I can tell you what time it is simply because I'm outside all the time and I'm working within the cycle of life and the laws of nature. It's brought a calmness to my thinking and to my being. I'm really thankful to have had this opportunity.
That's very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big step to actually, you're like, I'm going to start this thing. And that's an and right there. That is a heavy and. Really appreciate knowing about that. Can you tell people the best place to follow either the nonprofit or you or both? Is there social media or a website focal point?
Yeah, absolutely. longshadowsranch.net is the best place to follow our nonprofit work. ecampnd.com is my doctor website. And my books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get them directly from me cheaper. And you can do that through ecampnd.com. And I'm all over social media. If you look me up, I pop right up. Not because I've done anything in particular to make that happen. I'm not sure how it happens, but Long Shadows Ranch and me, we pop up all over.
Wonderful. Well, want to thank everybody out there for listening. Please, if you take something from this, please let us know. I'd love to have your feedback on the ways that you've confronted addiction and particularly smoking addiction things. Love to hear from you and your experiences. And please share this with people you know, loved ones or those who do struggle with this, to give them possibly a new wrinkle, as we should, in how a new angle, so to speak, in how they can deal with it as well. Want to remind everybody as well to check out our charity of focus for this month. Our focus is on the Prince Edward Island Transgender Network. You can go to peitn.com to learn more about them. They're a nonprofit that provides education, advocacy, and real practical supports for members of the transgender community in Prince Edward Island and in that area, and seem to be doing a lot of really good work. Of course, anybody who joins our Patreon to help us to keep the microphones running in the Broken Brain, if you do that, you get access to our bonus materials and episodes, and also 50% of your donation every month, as long as you're a paid donor, will go to the charity of focus in the month in which you join. And that will be that'll be there as long as you're a member. Or go to peitn.com and get involved directly with them as well. So, Dr. Camp, thank you again for being here, and also thank you for the work that you're doing out there.
Thank you for having me and for all your support of everyone that I hear you doing.
Hey, everybody, quick note as well. We didn't get it on the program, but Dr. Camp also does a podcast called Vital Wisdom. We talked about that a little bit after the recording, and I wanted to make sure to get that plug in there for everybody. So check it out.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.